Hey guys, how you going? It's Vol. Recently, there was a big tournament in Spain called the Interplanetario, which is the tournament officially run by Corvus Belli, who make Infinity. And some people regard it as quite an important tournament. Many people travel from elsewhere in Spain and, of course, around the world to play at it, Australia, America, and so forth. And whenever the tournament's held, obviously a lot comes out of it during the whole process. There are the seminars and the Q&As, and it's quite a big event. But players also look at who won the event, which factions won, what was the breakdown with what stuff people took, and how did it all play out. As part of that process, I'm led to believe, or at least from reading the forums, that there was a pack that came out that included everybody's army list so that the general public could look at it. And somebody went through that and broke it down and just made a bit of a write-up about what units people did take and what they didn't take. And I personally, I was not at the Interplanetario. Obviously, I'm stuck here in New Zealand, so flying to Spain is a little bit difficult. Maybe I'll get there one day. But I just want to say first up that I don't know firsthand anything that actually happened at the event, and I haven't actually read the lists. So all I'm really doing is playing armchair here and speculating and sort of looking at what I'm reading on the forums and reacting and commentating. And hopefully, you guys will join me in my little thoughtful process here, because what I want to sort of spend a little bit of time talking about is the information that we got out of that and how people are reacting to it. So let's begin. Just going to jump into the Infinity forums here and see if I can find the thread where that was talked about, and we'll have a little look through it. One thing that came up on the forums in the last day or two is that somebody said something like, hey, can you guys just bear in mind that the Interplanetario is more of a local event than an international sort of inviting of the very best players? Obviously, there are a lot of people in other countries that are extremely good at Infinity that couldn't really have been there because it's quite an effort to get over there. And although over 100 people played at this tournament, you got to remember a lot of them are still people who played there because they can make it, they live in Spain, and they aren't necessarily like the very best players around. So when we talk about how many people played this faction or how many people use this particular unit, well, you might just want to remember that some of these people aren't really as good at playing as Infinity as you might be, as somebody watching this YouTube video. Then I had another response which said, "Oh, well, actually, the people that play in Spain and so forth are very good, and not everybody agrees with that side of things as well." So again, I'm not too sure what to think about that. But I've been to a lot of wargaming tournaments in my time, not just for Infinity, but for Warhammer and War Machine and so forth, and 40k. And every single tournament, there's always, sometimes there's a tough field, sometimes it's an easy field, but there's always a spectrum of good players and very weak players, because tournaments are for everyone after all. So, should we jump into it? Should we have a little look? If you guys don't already know, the tournament was won by a guy running military orders, and he played the fire team that involves a couple of, I think, Hospitality Knights and the Magisters, and I think that's one of the better core fire team links in that sectorial. Military orders aren't really regarded as the best faction around, but I just want to remind people that Infinity is a game that is first and foremost about your understanding of the rules and the scenario, and coming to the table with a game plan about how to actually shift your odds in your favor. That's what determines the winner of that game, and over a period of time the winner of a tournament, more so than any other factor. And then just underneath that, we have things like the specific scenario that you had to play and who won the lieutenant role, and whether the scenario really worked well with your lists and so forth. And the table layout, that's also a factor. And then maybe a little bit below that, we have dice rolls, which really do determine games sometimes. There's no way around it. Sometimes you play perfectly and you leave yourself plenty of opportunity to collect an objective or to kill enemy models, but there's just a spike in variance for that particular game and you end up losing. And we all know that's the case. That's not one of the higher things that determines winning games over a long period of time, but it does factor in. And even like a tournament where 5 or 6 games are played, that is still too small a data sample to rule luck out. Obviously, the first, second, third, and fourth placings are still going to be influenced by that. And then, of course, below those factors, we have game balance and Armulus and what models you take. So it's not really crazy that one faction wins and one faction, doesn't. There's always going to be that. I think in a previous year, still Phalanx won it. Whatever. It's more about the people who choose to take those lists, and I like to think that, when you look at the people who in the top third compared to the bottom third, even if everyone was forced to change factions, you generally see the same people, appear in the same sort of place in a tournament. Okay, so let's see if I can. I mean, obviously, you guys can go to, the forums yourself and read this thread yourself. I will post the link to this thread in the video description. But one thing that this guy who analyzed the the pack of all the data, he's just gone through some general overall, not faction specific stuff, and we'll read that now. By the way, I want to say also that when you're analyzing this data, don't forget that there's a number of players, and each player has 2 lists. So we're also looking at how often did a certain thing appear in at least one of each player's 2 lists, right? Looking through this, some people used the Alive team and so forth. A lot of people just used Switch. Okay, so Switch is the member of the Alive team who has the killer hacking device. And it seems very obvious to me that people are going to be using Switch more often because the killer hacking device is a lot more useful than the assault hacking device and white hacking device in that context. And of course, just by picking him, you keep the costs down. It's not so bad that he's irregular. So we see a Switch being used, 18 times compared with the other 2 being used twice and 3 times respectively. So that does not surprise me at all. Scarface used a little bit. That's fine. Other mercenaries, we've got Armand, we've got Krakot and Warhorse. Armand wasn't used that much. The Krakot, yes, 24 Krakots showed up, I think, and that doesn't surprise me at all. The Krakot is a unit that is really good against jammers, ignores that. It's cheap enough to be a cheerleader that fits more easily into deployment because he's got forward deployment. Some games he's just going to do nothing and cheerlead for you, and that's fine, but in other games he's going to solve problems for you using a submachine gun or berserk or a chest mine. So I really recommend factions that can take the Krakot to take it. And then we had the Warcore, which was used a crazy amount of times. Just about everybody that could use a Warcore took one. And I don't take Warcores that much, but I can see why everybody else rates the Warcore so highly. Just for 3 points, you can potentially cost your opponent orders, and if you get a little bit lucky, you completely throw their plan for that turn down the tubes with a crit flash pulse, and you barely lose anything by taking him. So if you have an empty slot, he's definitely worth putting in there. Only reason I don't take him sometimes is I'm very tight with my lists, and I like to take Palbots and things, but I can't deny that the Warcore is very, very good. Specialists and so forth, I don't really want to say too much about that, just because Armulus choices still come down to the scenarios, and in this particular video, I'm not going to talk too much about the scenarios. You can look up what scenarios were in the event yourself if you like. Hacking, this is a really interesting chart because you look at this and you see defensive hacking devices barely get taken because they're bad. They don't really provide any really meaningful use. Normal hacking devices, plenty of those because you need assisted fire. That's really good there. Hacking device plus, not as common, and that's partly because they are not really as common in terms of factions being able to take them. But what really surprised me is that although killer hacking devices are, plenty of those as you'd expect, they're really good. Even more people took assault hacking devices, and my explanation for that is that the meta in Spain and so forth, and people's perception of the scenarios and the kind of terrain, is that there are going to be a lot of tags, and a lot of people did take the tags to the tournament, and I think a lot of people going to the tournament expected to face them. So I'm not surprised by that. I personally think assault hacking devices are very good if they are on a model that has marker state. If not, they're a bit vulnerable. When I've been playing NCA lately and playing with the Alive team, what I do is I actually use Switch to be holo projected as the assault hacking device Sky Cypher, so that your opponent won't really know which one they're going to be up against, which helps to protect them. But otherwise, if you're going to play like a Jan Bazan assault hacker or a NIST assault hacker, those profiles are really weak because they are trying to do 2 roles that they're not really good at either of them, and they make themselves very vulnerable to killer hacking. Then we have a look at the faction breakdown. So first of all, Aleph is the least representative faction, 9 out of 108 players, it says there. We had 6 vanilla, 3 still Phalanx. So, Aleph, I would have thought that would have been a little bit more popular, but seeing Flamestrike and Wotan campaigns, it's dawned on me that people tend to play the other factions, and that's fair enough. I don't really play much Aleph because they are a bit dry to me, so maybe other people share my feelings about their aesthetics and so forth and their style of play. Fair enough. So specialists, we saw a lot of Macaon and Sophotex, obviously, not surprised by that. Let's skip over the specialist because I think that's pretty standard. What is interesting here is that we had a lot of Maruts, hopefully I'm saying that right, Maruts, as lieutenants, and again, this is a meta where tags are pretty popular. I don't particularly like the Marut quite a lot, but others do. He's got a little section for auto includes, and later on in this spiel, we're going to see some factions always included a particular unit, and that's going to be the most interesting part of this commentary. But in vanilla, there was nothing that everybody always took, which is quite cool. But there were some models that people never took. Nobody ever took an Asura. So of the, what was that, 6 vanilla players, none of those 6 players took an Asura. And that doesn't surprise me. I think the Asura is a little bit overcosted because it doesn't have an access to an HMG, and that's probably the weapon to go for if you've got a multispectral visor like it does. It's a very expensive unit. It's a little bit slow because it starts in deployment zone 4/4 speed. And again, MSV, if you're using it as an ARO piece, you just get shot by an HMG and you die. If you're trying to attack with it, well, you're still just a model walking around with a Spitfire, and there are other models that can do that role better. You know, Achilles in this case. So I don't really quite like it. And the Hacking Device Plus, it's kind of cool, but you know, White Noise and Cybermask aren't really sort of deal breakers for me. And now they have the Danvanis Hacker, which can do that anyway. So I'm not surprised that there are no Asuras. Posthuman Mark III, I believe that is the kind of posthuman that has a Spitfire and no other frills. We're just going to double check that so that I get my facts right on that one. Let's find the posthumans on the list. Posthuman Mark III, it is the Spitfire Nanopulsar. See, again, issue with this is that it's got no mimetism or ODD or marker state or NWI, so you're investing in a model that is fulfilling a role that is going to be done better by some other model in your army. You know, Aleph has access to all these Greek superheroes that can do a really good job sweeping things and Ramboing things. You know, so you'd take those instead. So I understand why people haven't taken the Mark III. Frequent appearances, posthumans. Yep, posthumans are really, really strong, especially the Mark II. That's my most favored posthuman. And then infrequent appearances, I don't think we can place too much stock in this because we've got a pretty low data sample. Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised to see only one Krakot. I'm going to be playing a lot of Krakots when I play Aleph. With Steel Phalanx, we saw a lot of Macaon. He's very, very good. All of the Steel Phalanx players took Macaon or Phoenix, and I don't blame them. They're probably the best characters you can take within Steel Phalanx context. Nobody included Achilles version 2, but there was Achilles 1 being used. And this is something that I find really interesting and I want to talk about. And before Interplanetario, I went around saying to people, I like Achilles 1 better than Achilles 2. And when I talked to Steel Phalanx players, and there's a couple of them in my meta, they were saying, okay, well, Achilles 2 has more armor, and he starts further up. And I don't really mind losing ODD because I've at least got mimetism, and the multi-rifle's kind of cool, and so on and so forth. But the reason why I like Achilles 1 is because of the role that he plays. So you've got your Achilles, and I don't think you're really going to be using Achilles as like an ARO piece, right? I think that when you're using Achilles, you're going to find the right time to strike and you're going to go out there and you're going to kill a whole bunch of things, and you're going to be really difficult for them to remove. And the thing about ODD is this: when you are attacking, sometimes you're just going to be firing all 4 shots, and you're trying to kill things one at a time, and the worst thing that can happen is for you to shoot them and they don't die and they guts into cover or something like that. Or you split your burst into 2 things and you don't inflict the maximum damage, because the weakness and the danger for Achilles, and yes, there is a danger for Achilles, is that you run out of orders. That you don't inflict as much damage as you are trying to, and your opponent gets their turn to fix the problem and counter-attack. The thing about ODD is that as you're coming around and wiping out cheerleaders, well, they might shoot back at you, or they might try and flash pulse you, right? And their roll, the higher it is, even if they lose the face-to-face roll, is sometimes going to negate some of your rolls. So Achilles rolls a 1, he rolls a 5, he rolls a 10, he rolls a 17, and the other guy might roll like a 6. Okay, now depending on whether you have ODD or mimetism, that may or may not negate one of your hits. So you are going to be wanting to inflict the maximum number of hits as possible, and that may sound like, oh, it's overkill, it doesn't matter, but it does, because if you're not doing the maximum amount of damage, you're going to run out of orders, and Achilles is going to die, or they're going to respond and win on scenario, and a list with Achilles is not going to have that much else in it to really back him up. So that's why ODD is just so crucial. And although he loses out in the armor, he's not there to take hits, he's there to deal the hits. So that's why Achilles 1 is my preferred choice, and apparently people that play Steel Phalanx at Interplanetario. Next up, we've got Ariadna, 4th most represented, 14 players taking them, split into the sectorials. I don't know a lot about Ariadna, so you'll have to forgive me. I'm not going to say that much about this. I do want to say, though, that everybody took the line Kazakhs because they're nice and cheap, extra orders. I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. Everybody took the Spetsnaz, one of the best Ariadnan units, very powerful unit for that surprise attack, that marksmanship. Nobody included Yevgeny Voronin, and the reason why is that to get his points, to get his value, he's got to be the lieutenant, and all you really get is Strategos. He's an expensive lieutenant, he's an obvious lieutenant, and his base is very big, so he's easy to actually find and kill. So most Ariadna players, I'm sure, would rather take a lieutenant that's not obvious or is in the market state, and they don't have to worry about that, whereas the value they get from Yevgeny just doesn't make it worth it. It's not enough. Heaps of people took chasseurs and volunteers, totally understandable, they're solid as can be. As for everything else, don't really have much to say. Caledonia, everybody took William Wallace. I think that's kind of cool, but again, the sample size is a bit low. Remember, you see 4 William Wallace, but that might be the case that there's 2 lists both with him in it, and there are 2 players that have 2 lists each. So there's that. I'll have to look up more mayors to really comment about why they weren't included at all, but again, very low sample size, so I don't think we should really comment too much. Yeah, I don't see anything else jumping out at me to really raise an eyebrow. So let's skip to Combined Army. 2nd most frequently played factions. They're very popular. I think Pano are the most popular. 2nd is Combined Army. 7 Vanilla, 4 Morat, or Onyx, 3 Shazvasti. We heard that Q drones are basically very close to being an autoclude. And I get that. A lot of people like Tiara emotes, and they're better than everybody else at Tiara emotes. So intuitively, you feel like you're just getting that additional value for free just by taking them. These days, what I'm doing with my Q drone is that I'm putting an HMG in my lists if I don't already have some decent ranged firepower at that distance. But I'm putting the Plasma Q drone in my lists if I've already got the long range covered. Let's say I'm playing Onyx with a Plasma Sniper and a Link Team and a missile launcher already. Well, I can use those models for long range and use the Q drone to go up close. Whereas if I'm playing a vanilla list that's got a lot of chain rifles and maybe a 1 missile launcher and that's it, I've got nothing to clear at long range, I haven't taken a mark rep with an HMG, then I'll put it in the TR bot with the HMG. So that's how I'm doing it. But I can fully understand why the Q drone's there. Also, the Dr. Worm, almost everybody took Dr. Worm every single list, and you can sort of see why as well. The thing about Combined Army is they have more remotes, or more reliance on remotes for cheerleaders a lot of the time, and you need to be able to cater to that as well as healing your other guys, and Combined Army just don't have a really good substitute. You've got the Kurga Engineer. There's nothing really that does what you need, and of course the classified objective is a big deal sometimes, so that's the only explanation really. I mean, there's no competing model in that faction to really give the Dr. Worm a run for his money. Nobody took an Anathematic, which is interesting. I would have thought people would have liked them in the popular, but sometimes it's hard to build a tournament list around them for specific scenarios. I find it's very scenario based, and maybe the scenarios weren't really appropriate for them. We did see avatars and Carontids and things. There was nothing that was auto-include. There was no one thing that people always took, which surprises me a little bit because I always take Icadrons. I never leave home without them, so some people not taking Icadrons at all, kind of interesting. Okay, let's have a quick look. Nobody used Tritac Anyat. But that's fair enough. I mean, if you're going to be relying on the other things like the non-Vanguard links, I think the right reason why people didn't take Anyat is because people really like the Hungry's link team, and they didn't want to do what I do, which is to swap between them. That's very hard to do, so I can fully understand that. With Onyx, we saw that the Nexus was almost always People's Lieutenant, and as I said in my Onyx video, that's usually the best way to go. Nobody included a Suryat except for when it was played in Morats, and Suryats, they need help at the moment. They're very bland. There are better things in the faction to take. So yeah, Shazvasti, a bit of an interesting faction. I don't want to say anything about this. Nothing really jumps out at me. Then we've got Haqqislam, which were the second least represented, so only 10 players playing them. Let's just have a little scan through. So vanilla, nobody had an auto include. It was fairly spread around. The people who played Haqqislam didn't take the bikers. They didn't take you know, Cum Chief, Kasim Beg, and the biker sisters. And I think that's probably because the basic Cum Riders do that job a little more cheaply, and they fulfill the role. So no need to spend any additional points on them. Kawarij. This is before Fatality, and remember, if you're going to run a Kawarij, maybe it's just better to run Tariq Mansuri. Just in general, they don't really have enough oomph. They are, you know, 4/4 speed with super jump, so it's very hard and order inefficient to get around and get the value out of them. So I think that's why. People always took Gazi Motiwa, although what this is telling me is that a couple of people showed up and didn't take Gazi Motiwa. What? But again, it just comes back to the fact that when you've got over 100 people, there are always going to be one or two people who come along and they're not really great Infinity players. They're not really there to sort of just do the best they can. They just want to play the list they want to play with their own understanding of the game. So that's fair enough. I mean, you've got to account for that not every one of the 100 people at the field is just a die-hard expert Infinity player. What else jumps out at me here? Weren't that many QK. So Nomads were the 4th least represented faction, which is surprising. I thought Nomads would be a lot more popular than that, even with the data sample like over 100. So let's have a look, see if we can see anything interesting. Daktari, very popular. Nobody took Grenzers. Nobody took Securitates. And again, those particular units are very bland. There are things in their faction that do the job better than they do. I would really like to see those units buffed, actually. The Grenzer is a model that comes in the Operation Ice Storm starter set, and he's got MSV1, but you'd really rather take an Intruder for so many reasons. I think the Grenzers should just get some other piece of tech, some other thing that could make them relevant. So we saw a lot of Interventors and Jaguars, no surprises there. Bakunin, everybody played Moderators, is that what I'm seeing here? I'm a little bit surprised by that because I would have thought Riot Girls would have been a bit more popular from what I hear on the internet, but you can't really trust the internet. Nobody played Brando Castro in Bakunin. surprising. Would have thought he'd be pretty good. I'm not a Nomad player, so I can't fully comment on that. Corregidor, Dactaris, Intruders, Jaguars, Tomcats. Well, that's what I see from people anyway. I don't particularly like the Tomcats, but the people that did play Corregidor did run them. But when I play against Corregidor players in my country, that's what happens. So PanOceania, the most popular faction, and that's always going to be the case. They are the Space Marines of Infinity. They are to Space Marines. They are to Infinity what Ultramarines are to Space Marines. They are the favorites. He says here that PanOceania seem to be running a lot more cheerleader units, and with only a few units doing all the work, and that's actually how I play PanOceania, right? That's how I think they are best played. I see some people pick up Pano, and they're playing this powerful unit, and they've got 4 or 5 sort of elite guys in the same list, and they're too auto-starved. You know, that your resources are spread too thin, and you don't have enough auto power to back them up, which is a shame, because Pano are capable of really spamming a lot of cheerleaders. So, what can we find? Nobody played a Yotum. Fair enough. There are heaps of different tags you can take, so just coincidentally it wasn't used. Doesn't mean the Yotum's bad. Nobody played the Kamau, and I believe this is before the Kamau got upgraded, so even with the upgrade I think he still kind of sucks. There wasn't anything that everybody always took. Just about everybody used Fusiliers though, for obvious reasons, so that's not really a surprise. We had a lot of cutters. All the other tags seemed to got sort of one of each. Military orders. Didn't play Konstantinos. Didn't really play Father Knights in military orders. That makes sense. People typically don't use Joan of Arc 2, and this sort of comes back to my conversation about Achilles. I think the reason why people don't use Joan of Arc 2 is that she's got a bit of a weird profile that sort of sacrifices some stats. Like, she goes down to armor 3 instead of 5, which I think people feel is a big deal. And maybe people just like the close range sort of Spitfire, sorry, multi-rifle. And I can kind of get that if you're playing military orders, because you've got other knights that have Spitfires. If I'm playing Joan of Arc in vanilla, I might take version 2, but generally version 1 seems to fill the role when she's backed up by other long-range guns better with that particular kit. So maybe that's an explanation for that. NeoTerra. Nobody played the Peacemaker. Nobody played Orc Troopers. Well, I can understand Orc Troopers, but Peacemaker Armbots, you'll hear more from me about that in my video coming up at the end of this month about NCA. Initially, I thought, well, I'm definitely going to be using the Peacemaker because it's amazing, but I've been thinking about it a bit more. And the thing is that a Bulleteer only needs 1 order to make it to the middle of the table from your deployment zone, where the Peacemaker starts. And the Peacemaker isn't going to last as long because it doesn't have the ODD. And the little robot it comes with, the Orc Spot, I don't know, man. That's going to be vulnerable to hacking as well. It's going to die as soon as it gets into a face-to-face roll. I just don't know. The thing about a Peacemaker is that you need to be going first all the time to get value out of it. Otherwise, if you're going second, if you leave it out in the middle of the table, they're just going to kill it. So that accounted for, I can see why people aren't really running the Peacemaker, and I probably won't either now that I've actually made that conclusion, that analysis. Then we've got Tohaa, third most represented. Thing about Tohaa, as we all expected, everybody is using Symbiomates. There were some people who only used one Kael'tar with the double Symbiomate. Most people use 2 Kael'tars with the 4 Symbiomates. Why wouldn't you? If I end up playing Tohaa at some point, I might run lists that only have 1 Kael'tar and the 2 Symbiomates rather than all 4, just because I kind of feel obnoxious. They're the most broken thing in the game at the moment. So hopefully they get changed. Nobody took Alis Kisan, that's the Diapho that can link up in the Triads, and I think she's a little bit outdated now that people have got Sukiels to use and so forth. She's got some really cool kit, but her hacking device is just really redundant. There are other specialists you can use, and yeah, I mean, you've got K1 rifles and HMGs on Sukiels and things like that, so I can't blame people for not taking them. Yuqing, the faction that I play the most, the third least represented faction, so barely any people playing them. That is kind of crazy. But let's have a look. So what can we discover? Zhanshi Lieutenant's more common than anything else. Yep. Nobody played the Shang-Chi. nobody played the Zuyong. And if you remember my YouTube video where I talked about Yujing for like an hour, it's got like 5,000 views by now or over that. I I said that I didn't like those heavy infantry units, and I explained why. They have a role in which you want to get into face-to-face, Rambo attacks with them, but there are other models that do that better. Rushi into smoke, Hack Tau, Cien Warrior doing that. Arago to Spitfire probably does that better. You've got other ways of achieving that, and at the end of the day, they become hacking targets if you just leave them lying around. They're expensive. They can be specialists, but your ninja and your Guilang are just so much better at that. And it looks like the Yuching players that went into Planetario didn't take them either, so fair enough. Everybody took Celestial Guards and Guangxi. Well, no surprises there. I mean, they're the best thing in the faction, and I've explained before why. They're too powerful at the moment. I would personally fix that by not changing the Guangxi profile, but changing the Celestial Guard profile. What I would do to solve the problem is I would split the profile so that the Guangxi control device doesn't have the light smoke grenade launcher. So if you want the light smoke grenade launcher, you have to get a completely different Celestial Guard. And if you want the control device, you just have to take this pleb that pays full, like 5.5 SWCs plus the full points for that Celestial Guard. And that all he does is he allows you to get Guangxi, so he's just a price boost for the Guangxi without giving you any additional value of the smoke grenade launcher. And I think that would, it wouldn't really hit vanilla as hard, but vanilla can only take 4 Guangxi. It'd make ISS worse, but they need to be worse because they're too powerful at the moment. So that I believe would be a decent fix. Imperial Service, same sort of story. Nobody played a Cien Warrior, and I can understand that because there are so many things which are at a premium. The Sujian and the Crane and stuff like that are just so good in Imperial Service that you don't have to use a Cien Warrior. I don't mind it. I'd probably run the Cien sometimes in ISS, as you guys know, but not as much as I'd run the Crane and the Sujian, which people tended to take. Also want to point out that in none of these lists, except for I think one Japanese sectorial list and one vanilla list, we saw the Lu Duan. The Lu Duan is pretty bad. The Lu Duan is the holo projector battle bot, and it's too clunky to use with HP2 because you've got to actually get around the map and you've got such a big base. With HP1, it's very hard to find something realistic that you'd actually pretend to be. The Mark 12 and MSV1 just isn't as solid at killing things as the Rushi is with its Spitfire and MSV2. And it's just becomes a bit of a target, really. So, yeah, people don't take them, and that's why. None of the Japanese players took the Shikami or the Aragoto or the Rushi. I can understand the Aragoto and the Shikami because they aren't wonderful. The Rushi, well, I guess that people playing Japanese sectorial have other ways to deal with templates. With marker state and ODD. I mean, they've got close combat and they've got direct template weapons. Bear in mind, guys, that again, very small data sample. I mean, what we've got 3 Japanese sectorial players and nobody took an Aragoto. You can, if there were 30 Japanese players, I'm sure you'd see a lot of Aragotos. So bear that in mind. It's not because they are just, you can't take them. I take the Aragoto sometimes. Yeah, I think somewhere else we saw the list posted from the guy that ran Imperial Service and came like 5th. I think this one, yeah, 5th place. So just have a quick look at that before we finish up. This is in Spanish, but one of his lists had the Celestial Guard, only 4 Guangxi in Imperial Service. So instead he's got really weird choice of the assault hacking device on the Canren, which I don't like because he's out in the middle of the table and he can easily be picked off by a killer hacker. And then the ninja is just the pleb ninja without the killing hacking device. So this list makes no sense to me. But hey, obviously good players come 5th. And the other list he took had the Sunse Sniper, which again I don't think is as useful as say a Crane would have been. And again, only 4 Guangxi rather than 8. Got the soft detect again, assault hacking Canren. no ninja at all. So, like a lot of people on this forum thread, we're looking at this and going, what? There's some things that just definitely don't add up. But at the end of the day, the meta is different over there. The tables are set out differently over there. Not everybody is like an amazing player over there as well. So sometimes to rise the ranks and get to, say, fifth place or top 10 in a large pool like that means that you're overcoming a lot of people who aren't necessarily right at the top. Matchups do, and the pairings and sort of the draw matters a lot as well. I've been to a lot of big tournaments for War Machine and Warhammer to know that. But yeah, kind of interesting. And generally, this data does seem to agree with my intuitive understanding and analytical understanding of the game. There were a few, anomalies there, but again, data sample also a little bit low for some of this stuff too. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that, and we'll have some more bat reps and Infinity analysis later on.